Welcome everyone, my name is John Megling. I'm a Senior System Engineer for Microsoft at Tech Data. And today I'd like to welcome you to our series of videos that cover the building blocks of Microsoft Azure. In this webinar today we'll take a look at the Microsoft Azure Backup and how you can use it to provide value to your customers. We'll cover the basics and I'll provide a demo so you can see how to get started creating backups. We'll start with a look at data protection challenges organizations are facing today. This will take us nicely into what Azure Backup is, when to use it, and how it will help you address and overcome these challenges, regardless of the size of your organization. We will also take a look at security and move into some different scenarios where Azure Backup is a good fit. Next, I will break out into a demo where I'll show you how to get started with Azure Backup. Then we'll end with a quick look at how Azure Backup is priced and some next steps. This should not come as a surprise to anyone that the amount of data organizations are collecting and storing is on the rise. Analysts tell us that data rates are growing more than 40% per year. Some published reports claim that as much as 90% of the world's data has been created in the past 2 years. This rapid rise means that the cost of storing data is rising year on year. The good news is the cost per terabyte is falling year on year, but unfortunately not as fast as data is growing. Data growth also impacts costs in other ways. Both backup and storage management costs tend to increase linearly with data growth. You have to manage all the backup media, store it, test it in case you need it. All this leads to possibility that important data may go unprotected, either entirely or for longer periods of time than is ideal. As we consider these challenges, let's see how Azure Backup helps address them. Azure Backup is backup as a service in Azure. In a nutshell, it provides customers with the ability to store backups off-site in storage provided by Azure. It integrates with Microsoft Backup tools provided by Azure and the System Center Data Protection Manager product, as well as being driven by PowerShell scripting. By integrating into these existing tools, Azure Backup delivers simple and reliable server backup to the cloud for customers. With Azure Backup, we make 3 copies of data for durability and availability. So if a rack or server goes down, your data is available and accessible. We provide 99.9% SLA for storage. Azure Storage System is the underpinning to everything in Azure that requires storage. The Azure Storage System provides a solid, robust data platform for different services that make use of it, using blobs, tables, and drives. Use blob service for storing large amounts of unstructured data that can be accessed from anywhere in the world via HTTP or HTTPS. A single blob can be hundreds of gigabytes in size, and a single storage account can contain terabytes of blobs. Common uses of blob storage include serving images or documents directly to a browser, storing files for distributed access, streaming video and audio, performing secure backup and disaster recovery, storing data for analysis by an on-premise or Azure hosted service. Tables is a NoSQL data store, which is ideal for storing structured non-relational data. Common uses of the table service include storing terabytes of structured data capable of serving web-scale applications, or storing datasets that don't require a full-fledged relational database. Drives are what are attached to VMs. They automatically provide the same durability and availability. Additionally, data is asynchronously copied to another data center that is at least 400 miles away. So you can be sure that every piece of data that you store in Azure Blob is available as well as protected against regional disasters. We call this geo-replication. Now let's take a look at security. The first stage in the transfer process is the encryption of your data on-premise using your key. Your data stays encrypted with your key while in transit over the wire to Azure Storage using Advanced Encryption Standard 256. The backup data is sent over a secure HTTPS link. Your data stays encrypted while in Azure Storage. It is never decrypted while it resides in Azure Storage. Your data can only be decrypted once it's restored on-premise. Only you have the decryption key to do this. This makes it very important to protect this key. Make sure you back up your key, keep it safe, and store a copy off-site. Your data cannot be decrypted without it. In the event of key loss, only you, the Azure customer, has the passphrase to unlock this data. Microsoft cannot decrypt the backup data at any point. When can you use Azure Backup? If you're already using System Center Data Protection Manager, you can start using Azure Backup today. It integrates with System Center Data Protection Manager. If you're a small business or branch office and have a small number of servers to protect, Azure Backup integrates with the in-the-box Windows Server backup tools you may already be using. Windows Azure Backup is suitable for any workload: file servers, SharePoint, SQL servers, and Exchange servers. Azure Backup integrates with Windows Server technologies to help make this happen. From the previous slide, we've seen that Azure Backup is suitable for a variety of organizations and workloads. Let's look at how Azure Backup works in more detail, starting with how to use Azure Backup in a small business environment or branch office. As previously mentioned, if you have a small number of servers and you want to protect the data they hold using the built-in tools, the process to configure Azure Backup is relatively simple. First, sign up for a Windows Azure account. This will provide you with access to the Azure Management Portal. From there, you can select the Recovery Services option and add the Azure Backup service to your account. The next step involves an exchange of data, installing the agent, and registering and configuring the key that we discussed earlier in the security section. As mentioned in the Azure Backup agent integrates with the existing Windows Server backup tool, and in this example we're using it for backup. When you start the tool after the agent installation, you register this server using your certificate, then you configure what data you want to back up and what schedule you want to use. That's it. If you're using a schedule, the server will now back up your data to that schedule. You can monitor backups from the backup tool to see when the backup ran, when the next one will run, and view any issues. If you need to recover data at any time, for example, a server failure or even an accidental deletion of a file or folder from a location being protected, you can use the backup tool to recover that data. Azure Backup provides very granular recovery options, either to the original server or a different one. Recovering data to an alternative server is a good practice for testing recovery procedures. The process for using Azure Backup Server is similar. First, sign up for an Azure account. This will provide you with access to the Azure Management Portal. From there, you can select the Recovery Services option and add the Azure Backup service to your account. The next step involves an exchange of data. You install the agent and register. Then you configure the ABS server and schedule backup. That's it. If you're using the schedule, the server will now back up your data to that schedule. You can monitor those backups from the Azure Backup Server tool, and when the backup ran, when the next one will run, and view any issues. The Azure Backup scenario is slightly different in that only the DPM server communicates directly with Azure, or the Azure Backup Server. Again, DPM and Azure Backup Server are the same. The backup of servers occurs locally to Azure Backup Server, which coordinates and centralizes communication to Azure. If you need to recover that data at any time, for example, a server failure or even an accidental deletion of a file or folder from a location being protected, you can use Azure Backup Server to recover the data. This slide shows the wide range of Microsoft products that can be backed up to Azure. We have a few data points that we can leverage here as to how we have optimized our backup and recovery solutions. In SQL Server, for example, we support any point-in-time recovery. We provide self-service restores and up to 2,000 SQL databases that can be protected using a single DPM or ABS Azure Backup Server. For Exchange, we provide protection against total loss due to local corruptions. We can also preserve data for point-in-time restores. When it comes to SharePoint, you can protect at the farm level, but you can do granular level recovery. Recovery of a document takes only a few seconds. New databases are automatically detected and protected. For Hyper-V, you can do item level recovery of your VMs. You can back up entire hosts, and you can even back up your entire VM, whether you've live migrated that virtual machine or not. You can back up the entire host and do item level recovery of virtual machines. We can back up data from all these sources once every 15 minutes to disk, and you can save this backup off-site in Azure. Now let's jump in and take a look at a demo of the different choices you have related to Azure backup and restoring it to the cloud. So let's jump in and take a look at creating a recovery service vault, our first step in getting Azure backup going. So we look at storage, we go to backup and site recovery. We're going to give the vault a name. Again, the name just needs to be unique. You can choose whatever you want here. This happens to be what I'm using. We're going to go ahead and create a new resource group, or we could use one we already have. But, again, for this example, we're going to go ahead and create a new one. We're going to make sure that we want this in the East US, which is what I'm working off of. In your case, you'd use the geography you're in. I'm going to pin that to the dashboard. We'll go ahead and create that. Notice it's starting the deployment. It's pinning it to our dashboard. It's deploying. Now we have our backup vault created. Let's take a look at some of the properties here. Notice we don't have any backup jobs going or any management servers yet because we just created the vault. And we'll scroll down here and look at the backup infrastructure and our backup configuration. Notice we have two options: locally redundant, geo-redundant. I like to use geo-redundant for backup jobs. Now that we've got our vault created, let's start our first backup. We're going to drill down here into our backup. It's under the Getting Started tab. You notice there's 3 steps to this. First, we have to decide what workload we're going to back up. Azure on-premise. In this case, we're going to back up a machine in Azure. It's a virtual machine, obviously. Next, it's going to load our backup policy. We can choose the default policy, or we can choose to create our own. In this case, let's take a look at creating our own. Like everything in Azure, we're going to need to give it a name. Again, just has to be unique. Start taking a look at a couple of these options. Our backup, in this case we're going to do daily. We have a choice here to choose times. It defaults to that time. Again, I want mine a little later in the night, like 10:30. We can determine how long it retains those daily backups. In this case, we'll go with the defaults. And then the weekly backup retention points, again, we pick our day. I'm going to go with Sunday. And then, again, the number of weekly backups it keeps. Retention on the monthly backups. Again, same kind of choices here. You can customize this to whatever meets your needs. And then yearly retention of the backups. We'll go ahead and hit OK to that. We're almost there. Now we have to pick the machine we want to back up. In this case, this is a list of my virtual machines in Azure. We're going to go for this domain controller that we created. We've got our 3 steps completed for the setup. And we're going to go ahead and hit OK and start that process. Submit that deployment. Get that deployment started. And that deployment's been started. Notice that we have our backup items listed now under our recovery vault. Let's go take a look at that. And there's our server that we picked. Again, notice the 2 options there. There's our server. And, it's just getting started with our first backup. Some statistics for that we populated as we start doing the backups. And as you can see, that's creating a backup of a virtual machine in Azure. Now let's take a look at backing up an on-premise server into Azure. First, we're going to go into our demo backup vault that we created. We're going to hit the backup piece there to add the new backup. Again, the 3 steps we have here, we're going to choose, an on-premise server. What do we want to back up? We have a few choices here. We're going to go files and folders for this example. And we're going to click this check here to see what's required. And this is what I'm going to walk you through: installing the Recovery Services Agent, downloading the vault credentials, scheduling a backup, and create the backup schedule. So let's get to it. Let's go ahead and download the Recovery Services Agent. It's a pretty small file, doesn't take very long. Once we get it downloaded, we're going to go to the virtual machine on premise, in this case, that we want to back up. There's our agent. We're going to go ahead and run that. We're going to take the defaults and we'll restore the files. If we had a proxy server, we'd put in those settings. In this case, I do not. It's telling us what we need is available on the server already. If not, we would install it. Going to go ahead and install the application. Notice it creates the backup icon over here for Microsoft Azure. It's going to validate our install. And notice we're all finished here. Agent is completed successfully. Now we're going to register that to the vault in Azure so we can have a place to back it up to. We're going to need our vault credentials. We're going to jump back over to the Azure portal, step 2 there, and download our vault credentials. Again, very quick process. Just showing you what's going on there, and save that to somewhere so you can get it to the virtual machine. Once you get it over there, go ahead and just put it somewhere on your virtual machine so you have access to it. And we're going to go back to the wizard, browse out and find those credentials that we saved to the desktop. It has to be within 2 days. The credentials do. In this case, we're good to go. I just created them. We're going to generate a passphrase. You can Microsoft do that, or you can create your own. We're going to choose where to save the passphrase. We're going to go ahead and finish up that wizard. All complete. We're going to go ahead and launch the Recovery Services Agent so we can start scheduling and creating our backup. This is our backup window we're going to work out of to create and schedule the backups. Notice the different options we have here. Scheduling is what we're after right now. We're going to go ahead and add what we want to back up. In this case, we're going to back up the C drive in the server. If we had shares, they'd show up there. They were going to choose like the backup schedule. You can take the defaults, or you can modify this to any of the settings that you want. Just showing you some of the setting options here. Going to go ahead and hit next there, and notice the options we have for the retention policy of the copies of the backups. Dailies, weeklies, monthlies, and yearlies, like we showed in the first part. Again, we can set these, or we can leave them at our defaults. And then we're going to go ahead and say, yeah, we want to do that over the network. And we're going to hit finish, and we're going to create our backup schedule. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is using Azure Backup Server. We're going to take a look at installing that and backing up an on-premise virtual machine into Azure. So we're going to go to our Azure Demo Vault that we're used to seeing by now. Go ahead and hit Backup. And we'll let the wizard kind of complete itself here. We're going to choose on-premise. And this time we're going to take a look at the list, and we're going to choose Hyper-V virtual machines, and we're going to check the infrastructure required for that. Notice that again, if I have System Center Data Protection Manager already, I'm good to go. I could use that, or I can download the Azure Backup Server that we provide. And we're going to need the good old Vault credentials in order to establish that connection. Go ahead and download that. We need all these files, so we're going to download those. We're going to copy them into our virtual machine. And we're going to start the backup installer. Basically, it's going to unpack the files and get us where we need to be to start the Azure Backup Server process. This just needs to be a 2012 R2 server, Windows Server 2012 R2. And we're going to start the Azure Backup Wizard now that the files have been unpacked. The wizard loads. Notice the steps that were going to happen. We're going to ahead and hit next. Going to do a prereq check to make sure our server meets all the necessary requirements to install Azure Backup Server. If it failed there, we just go ahead and do what's on the list. That way we're good to go. Same thing with the SQL Server. You don't need to buy SQL. SQL comes with Azure Backup Server for use only with Azure Backup Server. We're going to go ahead and check and make sure we're good to go for the SQL part also. We're good in this case. We're going to go ahead and take a look at that and hit next. Roll up screen. Notice where we're putting our files and how much drive space. And we're going to need to give SQL Server, the agent service, a password. And we're going to choose how we want the product to be updated. And then we're going to go ahead and install that. Just working our way through the wizard here. First thing it's going to do is install the Azure Recovery Services agent. Go through the setup. We're going to generate the passphrase, just like before when we did it for an on-site machine to Azure. And we're going to complete that process, install our product, close that, and we're good to go. Now we're going to load our ABS server. Now that we've got Azure Backup Server installed, let's take a look at setting it up and getting our first backup started. First thing we need to do is install agents on the machines that we want to back up on our on-premise network. So we're going to go ahead and get the agent section. Notice all our machines here that show up on our domain that we can pick to install the agent on. We're going to go ahead and use this specific server that I have out there for this. We're going to hit next in the wizard. And then we need to provide some credentials. Typically an admin level credential can install the agent on the virtual machine or physical server on our network. And then we're going to go ahead and say that if it needs to, it can restart. And we're going to go ahead and hit install the agent. And notice we get the success. We're going to close that. Next thing we need to do is add some drives, because remember, Azure Backup Server is server to disk to online. Simply go to add. There's our drive. Go ahead and hit OK. And now we have some on-premise space to store our backups. Now let's go ahead and start. We'll create a protection group. Protection group is the basic unit of which you establish the backups for. Again, everything's wizard driven, so that's pretty cool. Servers, here's our server that we picked. Notice the different options we have, different than file and folders from the first one we looked at. We can go pick the C drive, all the volumes, and we can do, this is bare metal restore. We're going to rename the protection group. Don't have to, we can choose the defaults, but I like to go ahead and rename that. Again, disk to cloud, notice the progression here. I can choose just disk and not cloud if I want, but I do have to have an Azure subscription in order to install the product. Go ahead and hit next. This is where we start getting into our backup schedules and redundancy and things like that of our backups. We can make many different choices here to get the custom schedule we want. It's going to look at the space on our local on-premise drive. Once that's done, everything checks out. We're going to go ahead and again take the defaults here. We're going to hit next. And we're telling it how we want to back up. If we have a large amount of data, we can actually do it manually and send that information to Microsoft, and they can add it to the backup schedule. Take the defaults here. Again, we're going to choose, now we're at the cloud portion. We're going to pick of this backup what part's going to go to cloud also, as well as disk. In this case, I'm going to pick both options here just so you can see it. Take the bare metal piece and the system state also. In our backup schedule, day, week, month, year, some choices here. It's the daily part of it we're going to take a look at in this case. Show you some of the options here. It's very flexible. And this is our retention policy. We're deciding how many days we're going to keep, the weeklies, the monthlies, and the yearlies. So we can keep, pretty much an infinite amount of backups in Azure. I'm going to do this backup online over the network. A roll-up screen that shows us what we've created, and we're going to create that backup. As you can see, it's working through the process. We get successes in all categories. And now we look in our DPM server, we've got all green. So now we've created some backups. Let's go to the Azure portal and take a look at our vault and look at some of the statistics, some of the monitoring capabilities within Azure of the backups we've already created. So notice we've got some statistics in here. We've got some storage that's been consumed. We're going to go down and take a look at the actual backup items. Notice we're looking at the Azure virtual machine that we created. We're going to go ahead and drill down into that. Once we're in there, we'll notice that we have some recovery points. And we've got some just general statistics about what's going on. We're going to go ahead and click into these recovery points. Again, they're listed. These are for the last 7 days. And that's how we go ahead and start the restore process. We just right-click the recovery point we're interested in, and we go ahead and start that process. Or we could do backup now, and we can also hit restore virtual machine from here. Take a look at that. Again, our restore points are listed. It's just another way to do the same thing. We go ahead and select that recovery point. And we'll take a look at the backup infrastructure. Remember, we have an Azure backup server going on. So we're going to take a look at that. This will show us we'll see our Azure backup server's been registered. That's definitely a good thing. And our production servers. Remember also we backed up and put the agent on our domain controller that was on site. Go ahead and look at that. Again, it just gives us some general statistics. We can see it's good to know that it's going on. So now take a look at that actual machine. Our domain controller that we were doing backups on. Notice our backups, no alerts, we're good. And again, we talked about that. Just scroll down, we can see some of the statistics that are being gathered. And then we look over here, we've got, the things we did already, we backed it up. Now we want to take a look at recovery. We'll start the recovery wizard. We can do this server, we can do another server from this, browse for the files that we want to recover, or we can search by name. We're going to select the volume. And notice our recovery points are in bold. We can pick one of those recovery points. And then we can drill down. We can recover the whole, C drive in this case, the whole volume, or we can pick a specific, file that we want to restore. this case, we'll do that. Again, we have some options here. Create copies, overwrite existing, do not overwrite. Again, some of the standard things that we can do with the product. And we would hit recover. Take a look at what Azure Backup costs. What I've done is grab the pricing details chart from the Microsoft website. You can get the details at the URL listed at the bottom of this slide. Notice that the pricing is different based on the number of instances protected and the amount of storage consumed. I have provided two examples for us to take a look at. The first example on the left uses geo-redundant storage, has 5 instances with the estimate of 500 gigabyte per instance for a total of 2,500 gigabyte. We would fall into the second tier of pricing listed above, so we're going to pay $10 per instance, in this case 5 instances, so $50. Next, the pricing calculator takes the type of storage, in this case geo-redundant, and makes that calculation. In our example, 2,500 gigabyte of this storage type cost us $120. The second example on the right shows the same example but using locally redundant storage. Notice the storage type is half the cost of geo-redundant storage. Locally redundant storage replicates your data 3 times within a storage scale unit, which is hosted in a data center in the region in which you created your storage account. Geo-redundant storage replicates your data to a secondary region that is hundreds of miles away from the primary region. If your storage account has GRS enabled, then your data is durable even in the case of a complete regional outage or a disaster in which the primary region is not recoverable. So it's important to select the storage type that meets your needs. To start using Azure Backup today, first sign up for a Windows Azure account with Tech Data. Next, visit the Azure Backup site to get a tutorial on how to set up and configure the product. Finally, visit TechNet for more advanced information on Azure Backup. Thank you for your time. That concludes our webinar, and I hope you found it informative.